day after the attack, Governor, I stood in the Rose Garden and I told the American people and the world that we were going to find out exactly what happened, that this was an act of terror.
I want to make sure we get that for the record, because it took the president 14 days before he called the attack in Benghazi an act of terror.
Get the transcript.
He did, in fact, sir. So let me call it an act of terror.
Can you say that a little louder, Candy?
He did call it an act of terror. It did as well take 2 weeks or so for the whole idea of there being a riot out there about this tape to come out. You're correct about that.
That was a big moment in last night's debate. It happened the 7th question in, about 70 minutes into the debate, the first foreign policy question, the only foreign policy question, about Libya. Now, we found out today that after the debate, the president talked to the questioner, the Libya questioner, Kerry Lotka, after the debate. He actually tells Fox that the president went up to him, and you see him talking to him there after the debate. He said, according to Lotka, that he wanted to clarify why it took so long to say a terror attack, even though the president mentioned it in the Rose Garden as said acts of terror. And here's the quote. President Obama said he really wanted to take the time to be deliberate, to make sure he had all the information.
Well, look, the first thing that must be said is the president did not, in fact, say on September 12th that this Benghazi attack was an act of terror. He used the phrase acts of terror, but he used it in a much more generic way. And the White House, if they want to make the argument, can say, look, the speech was about Benghazi. When the president uses the phrase acts of terror in a speech about Benghazi, it's clear that he's speaking about that. I don't actually buy that argument. I think that's a difficult argument for them to make, particularly given the context of what we saw over the subsequent 2 weeks. You saw an administration that went out of its way, in my view, to avoid calling what we saw in Benghazi a terrorist attack. And in fact, when Jay Carney finally acknowledged on September 20th in a gaggle, a press gaggle, that this was a terrorist attack, it was the top-line news item out of that gaggle. Mark Landler, the pool reporter from the New York Times, led his pool report and said the big news coming out of the pool report today is that Jay Carney finally acknowledged that this was a terror attack. This is, again, 8-9 days later. So the story coming out of there a week later was that the White House was finally acknowledging this is a terrorist attack. The president's argument yesterday, I thought, was meant to deceive people who were watching the debate. I mean, he said, in effect, we said this was a terrorist attack right from the beginning. All of these claims that we said contrary are nonsense. That's not, in fact, what they said. It's never what they said. And I still think they haven't answered many of the substantive questions that go into how they handled the intelligence that led to their conclusions. Ben,
you cover the White House for AP. Looking at what Lotka says about this conversation, and we talked to him today, that the president says that he was concerned. The reason that he didn't call it a terrorist attack for so long, he tells Lotka, is because he didn't want disinformation going out. Yet, were it not for Mitt Romney kind of going back and forth on that moment, essentially disinformation went out in this debate. The president let hang out there that he was suggesting, at least, that he called it a terrorist act from day one, September 12th.
Well, that's really interesting that the person who asked the question last night is now feeding us more information about what the president said to him privately. I think that Steve is raising this point that the whole debate, to me, misses the point in this sense. If you're a voter at home trying to figure out what an act of terror is on the Rose Garden statement the day after versus a terrorist attack from Jay Carney back to an act of terror last night, and they got into a brouhaha over whether it was in the transcript or not.
Semantics.
And Candy Crowley becomes part of that debate. The question I still have, Martha Raddatz asked it before the last debate, we never got an answer, is what happened with the intelligence to allow this to happen before September 11th in Benghazi, 4 Americans killed,
yeah.
and where is the focus on that question? You know, how did this happen?
Well, definitely. There are two sides to this
right.
Libya story. One is the security element and the warnings they had and al-Qaeda in Libya and how that all is happening and they don't know it. And two is the fact that it takes so long and they're focusing on this video, and the president delivers a speech to the UN and says 6 times that the video I mean, references the video 6 times.
Sure. I mean, there is no question that the explanation from the White House about what happened has changed, and the communication has been troubled, and they say that's because the intelligence changed and they're sort of keeping up with the story. But it ignores the point about why was the intelligence wrong in the first place? How did they get this so wrong if it wasn't actually a video? And it's all coming up in the election context, so viewers and voters are really trying to have to figure this out.
Politically, this comes before the foreign policy debate down in Boca Raton, Florida, anchored or hosted, moderated by Bob Schieffer. This is a Q&A session, sitting down at a table. Mitt Romney, many conservatives said, kind of whiffed on this moment. Yeah. And he did not mention it today on the stump. According to Carl Cameron, it didn't come up once.
No, and in fact, the indications from both campaigns today is that they want to shift more towards talking about the sanctions on Iran as the centerpiece, and the question about whether or not the president's policy with regard to Iran and stopping them from getting nuclear weapons, and the events in Syria and the relationship between Iran and Syria and weapons going to Syria.
I know that you lean left, but let's say that you're advising Mitt Romney after this moment. Do you say, don't talk about Libya today?
No, well, first of all, in this job that I'm doing with you, I'm not leaning left, or I'm trying to tell you what's going on.
I'm just saying, as an advisor, if you wanted to advise the Romney campaign.
I would say to the Romney campaign that the moment in the debate last night, the defining moment, the one we're still talking about, is the Libya moment. Mitt Romney really stepped into it when he said, you didn't say terror, and then that allowed President Obama to say, hold on, Governor, and then for Candy Crowley to step in, because the word terror was used. So that he stepped into it, and I think that's why the Wall Street Journal this morning, no left-leaning institution, said that was his weakest or worst moment during the debate.
Right, I know. So let's say you're advising the Romney campaign today.
I would say to them, listen, you guys have an opportunity here. I think people are still talking about it. I think that it's like, you know, softball. This pitch is just set up there and waiting now, plump and prime for the Monday debate. And so I think that there is further opportunity here. Has it gained traction? When we look at the polls, it isn't moving voters yet. But could it? That's what we don't know.
Here's what has changed specifically, is the president's stump speech when he talks about al-Qaeda. This is from Miami last Thursday and today in Iowa.
I said we'd end the war in Afghanistan, and we are. And today, al-Qaeda's on the run and Osama bin Laden is dead. I said we'd end the war in Afghanistan, and we are. I said we'd focus on the terrorists who actually attacked us on 9/11, and we have, and bin Laden is dead.
And we just confirmed again the speech just delivered moments ago. Al-Qaeda wasn't on the run for the second time today out of that stump speech. According to Ed Henry. So that's changing.
Well, look, the president has gotten a lot of grief. I mean, he said, you know, 2 weeks ago, he said al-Qaeda was on its heels, and you had all these people, at least I had all these people I talked to in the counterterrorism community who said, al-Qaeda is not on its heels. You had reports from the AP and others out of Iraq saying al-Qaeda is resurgent in Iraq. Al-Qaeda is rising in Yemen. Al-Qaeda is doing better in Libya. All of these things that seem to contradict the administration's line on the broad case that they've made for months now on al-Qaeda. So it doesn't surprise me that the president has dropped the al-Qaeda language. The real surprise is if Mitt Romney continues to back away from Libya. Now, I've talked to Ed Gillespie last night in the spin room. I talked to other advisors to Romney today. They assure me that they're not walking away from Libya. They understand that this is both important substantively and potentially politically beneficial to them. I would be surprised if we saw the Romney campaign sort of back off on Libya, particularly given the fact that we have a foreign policy and national security debate coming up on Monday.
Let me just quickly say that, in fact, al-Qaeda has been shortened. I think that their leadership has been decapitated. I think there's no question about that. But if you're talking about Muslim extremism, no. Muslim extremism has not been eliminated, and we have new elements now present, as we just saw, in Libya, a place that we didn't see it before.
We've detailed on this show many times about the reports in August of 2012 about the surging of al-Qaeda groups in Libya. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Ansar al-Sharia, rising, expanding.
Is not in any way extinguished. But if you're asking about
I'm going to run because we want to keep talking about this debate.
All right.
This has been a Sunfish production.